everyone, and welcome to this Time for Geography Curious Geographer interview. I hope you're all well and looking forward to half term. So today we are going live with Claire McGhee, who is a marine geoscientist working at Atkins, and we'll talk a little bit about what it is to be a marine geoscientist. And today we're going to explore the growth of renewables on the seabed and how we can plan for this using ground modelling. So this interview is brought to you for you in partnership with Atkins and in collaboration with Time for Geography. And so I'm going to pass over to Claire, Claire, if you wouldn't mind, start by telling us what is a marine geologist or a marine geoscientist, and what is your role in the renewable energy industry?
Thanks, Ellie. So a marine geoscientist is a type of scientist that studies the sediments and the rocks relating to the oceans. And we play a crucial role in the renewable sector because we particularly plan the development of offshore wind farms. And we play a crucial role in that too. We have to understand the seabed and below and really understand all the characteristics of that, and that really is necessary for successful planning and the construction of offshore wind farms at sea.
So there's so much a lot of infrastructure on renewable energies is sited on the seabed. So students will kind of know about offshore wind, but that's the only one maybe they might know about. Why is it so good to have kind of offshore energy, or why is a lot of infrastructure for renewable energies situated on the seabed?
Because onshore we are quite limited with space. So offshore, because I think Earth is covered by about 70% of oceans, meaning that we have an absolutely huge space to site infrastructure such as wind farms into. And offshore in the sea, we have wind speeds which are much greater than they are onshore. And if we put all the infrastructure into the oceans, it means that we can also harness the extra wind that we have at sea, which means we are going to have much better energy production from that as well, because we have higher wind speeds. So naturally, we have higher energy resulting from that as well. And in a world where we are competing with fossil fuels, we have to really scale up the size of wind farms. And because the oceans are so large, it gives us a lot of space to put these different infrastructures into. And in a time when fossil fuels are dominating, we need a lot of space and we need a lot of energy to compete with fossil fuels if we want to achieve net zero, and that we are reducing carbon. So we go to sea because we just have lots of space there, and we can really fill it with different wind farms, and it just allows us to really scale up the size of the farms and harness a lot more energy from those at sea too.
But it seems like it might be quite complicated to kind of build on the seabed. I always get amazed with kind of engineers, even like buildings or bridges when they're in water, because obviously it just looks so much more complicated than if you were just to build directly on land, which obviously is where kind of your role comes in as a marine geoscientist. But how do we actually go about understanding the seabed? It kind of seems like a bit of a black void for a lot of kind of school students. Don't really understand what's there. There's even like lots of shipwrecks on the floor as well. But how do we begin to plan to construct renewables on the seabed, such as offshore wind farms?
So to understand the seabed, we have to go to sea. So we take huge vessels out to sea, and during that time, the vessel will do different types of surveys. And in the surveys, they will collect non-invasive data, which is basically geophysical data. They will take images of the seabed and then images below the seabed as well. So we have these amazing high-resolution images of what the geology looks like below the seabed, and then also what the sediments look like on the seabed, and then what all the geology is like below the seabed as well. So we take these vessels out and they do huge surveys over the area where we think the wind farm would go. And then we use invasive techniques to kind of test what type of sediment is there, and these are usually by boreholes. So we are on the same vessel and we take huge boreholes through the sediments, and then we get up data that actually is representative of all the geology, and via that way we can then kind of work out where the best locations are for putting different wind farms into, because the sediment has to be strong enough to be able to hold the wind turbine in place. So we then take these boreholes that we've taken at sea and we send them away to labs, and the labs will then do different tests along all the boreholes, and then we understand how strong these sediments and are they likely to host wind farms or not, and that helps us choose the best locations where the wind farms might go, because then as a process of elimination, we eliminate different places that might not be the best locations, where it might not be strong enough, and in locations where we've proven that it's really good and from our boreholes, then we'll start doing a bit more investigation in that area, and that usually helps us really narrow down the locations of where these wind farms will go.
So we've kind of got some of the images of like the boats that you might go out and kind of investigate the seabed on, which I think was a big part of your job, kind of previously actually going out to investigate the seabed. How do you actually kind of do surveys? Is it like through like lasers to see like the different for the non-invasive ones? How are those actually carried out?
Yeah, we have a source on the back of the ship. So on the back of the ship, you have streamers. So it's just this huge long tail that you're trailing, and many, many different ones. And then we send a noise signal, and it's usually reflective of different waves that go down. So we send a noise signal, and that goes down through the water column, and it goes into the seabed and then below. And these signals shoot down, and they give us images from that. So it's just a huge ship with a streamer on the back, and we send down noise points, and the noise just comes back up as an image. So we're able to process all that data, and it gives us this really amazing image. So we just have a source on the top of the ship that sends a P wave down, and that comes back up, and via that motion of going through and you survey the whole area with this source and the entire time, and through that it brings these huge images up of the seabed, and we have them processed, and after the processing they just look incredible. You get to see all the different layers that make up the geology, and with the boreholes, we just then, after we've done the surveying from the geophysical surveys, and we get these really high resolution images of the seabed, below the seabed, we can then go in and choose where we want to have the boreholes, and that helps us link the borehole to the geophysical data as well, so we know what each layer is, and we have the borehole, so we can link the borehole to each layer, and we know exactly where things are and how continuous they are, because we have this huge image that covers quite a huge area, because the wind farms can be a huge scale, they can be really, really large. So the surveys that we do and the images that we get are really, really big as well. So we get a really, really amazing understanding of all the geology around there as well. Yep, and it's called seismic. Seismic imaging is what we do whenever we go down to actually take these images from the streamer and the shot point that we do that from.
I'm guessing that's where like your role is so crucial as like a marine geoscientist, is kind of looking at that geology and seeing whether it will work for a wind farm.
For sure. Yep, we do all the interpretation of the seismic data, so the images that we get from below the seabed. Yep, we will do all the interpretation from that, and that helps us understand where the best locations might be for the wind farms to go as well. And it also helps us exclude where we shouldn't put infrastructure, and that really helps with future projects as well, because then we know what sort of sediments might not be good, and we know which ones are good, and that helps us in the future eliminate places that might not be great without doing any major intrusive works like the boreholes as well.
What kind of sediment do we have? This is in terms of like students kind of visualizing it. Is there quite soft rock? Is it a complete mixture? Like what kind of geology actually is there on the seabed?
Sometimes you can have a very mixed array of different things. You can have rock that's outcropped on the seabed, so that's all really hard and really difficult to drive piles into. And a lot of the sediment that we actually put wind turbines into are glacial sediments, just because in the last glacial period, I guess we had an ice sheet that covered most of Scotland and the side of the seas. And for the North Sea, for example, we had ice sheets that covered there. So all the deposits that are there are mostly from a glacial origin, which means they can be very full of boulders, and it can be till, like glacial till, and different types of things. So it can be very poorly sorted and quite chaotic sediments as well. Which is why when we image the seabed, it's good to know where we might have boulders and different things that could pose as hazards. Whenever we go in to actually drill and do anything, or even to take boreholes, we have to figure out where all of these hazards they might be, and boulders as a product of glaciers coming over, and you might have drop stones that came out the glacier that are also there, which could be huge, and they could be hazards as well. So that's why we do all geophysical surveying to start with and get really good images of the seabed, because then we can figure out where there might be rock exposed at seabed, or where there might be softer sediments that are there that haven't been converted to rock yet. And the ones that haven't been converted to rock yet are usually the ones that we put the wind farms into. It's quite rare to have a wind farm in bedrock, but also not unheard of. We do have wind farms that are sited into very hard rock, but most of the time, I think from my experience, a lot of it is put into quite strong sediment, which acts like a rock but isn't fully a rock yet.
You kind of mentioned about some risks, particularly of like boulders being on the seabed as well, particularly if you're kind of obviously for building wind turbines, or for actually drilling down. But what risks are there to building on the seabed? And then kind of linked to that, how can we kind of mitigate the risks?
God, yeah, there is a lot of hazards on the seabed, and like you said at the start, we have shipwrecks that are littered across a lot of our near shore, like oceans that are close to the beach, like just offshore from the beach. But in general terms, we have a lot of shipwrecks that do cover a lot. The site, so we have to have really good geophysical surveys of the seabed so that we can see where the shipwrecks are and we can avoid them. We would also find boulders on the seabed by doing a boulder analysis, and we would check to see where the distribution of boulders were as well. There could be old infrastructure that was also there before, perhaps some fishing equipment or different things that were in the seabed before that could also pose as a hazard, not only in actually siting the infrastructure, but in collecting geophysical data. We might run into fishing gear that's been abandoned in the sea as well. That isn't on the seabed, but it's floating around in the waters, and that can also be a hazard to data collection as well. And we've got a lot of natural hazards on the seabed as well. We might have live in an area that has a lot more seismicity, so it has earthquakes, and ground shaking can cause liquefaction, which could also be a risk to wind farms that are offshore as well. And a lot of perhaps submarine landslides that are near shore or near the wind farm, if they're triggered by an earthquake, it could induce a lot of sediment that goes then into the wind farm, and it could have an impact on the foundations there as well, landslides. And then also, I guess, from what we know about the Tunga volcano, if there was anything sited near any volcanoes and they have a massive eruption, that could also pose a risk to the wind farm as well. And since it takes so long to plan and get the wind farms into operation, it takes years for this to go. We really don't want any huge risks that are going to impact that after it's been constructed as well, or anything that might compromise the integrity of the structure that could happen. We try and eliminate that or de-risk that very much at the start, and try and have the most minimal risk associated with putting a particular wind farm in a particular location as well.
Just a quick question, then we've got a question that's come up as well from a guest who's listening. Is your role very much in the exploratory stage, or will you be involved through the actual building of the offshore wind as well?
Yeah, so usually in the offshore wind sector, we have a couple of phases of ground modelling where we will do the ground modelling, and it will be just like we chatted about, it will take the geophysical data and the borehole data, and it will integrate these together to make a complete model. And then that will help facilitate the design. And different teams work on different things. Mostly, I do a lot of ground modelling for offshore wind, and then we will also support the development of the offshore wind farm. So we do a lot of support for the development in case that they put a turbine in a location and it might not work. They might want to find another location nearby, and they would come back to us again, and we would find a different location that was better, and then they could resite the foundations into that location as well. So yeah, we start with the planning, and then we do the ground modelling, and then we do the support through all the design phase as well. Yeah, so we do get to see the initial concept all the way through to the design and the construction, which is really nice because then there is an end product at the end that you get to see, which is really good.
Yeah. And this kind of links really nicely onto James' question, who has an important emissions test tomorrow, so good luck, James, who has asked, by 2050, we talked about kind of net zero earlier, what percentage of global energy production do you realistically see wind power generating? Do you feel it's a big kind of future in terms of renewables? Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, as a marine geoscientist, I would absolutely love to see wind become one of the most dominant, one of the most dominant energy sources that we have would be really, really good. I think at the moment, in terms of global supply, I think wind only contributes less than 11% at the moment, if I'm not mistaken, if that hasn't changed again. But yeah, I would love to see wind get much bigger and also try and compete with fossil fuels. I think that's just our main challenge, is trying to find something that we can scale up as fast, as quickly and as big, and to compete with fossil fuels. I think we're trying to compete, and it's just, if our technology advances faster than it is now, and it's already going hyper speeds at the moment, if our technology keeps pace with how the wind is evolving at the moment, then yeah, I could see that contributing a much larger percentage to the overall energy supply that we have, and it would be great if we did. And hopefully other technologies come along, like things that might be able to exploit tidal power and also wave power. And at the moment, those environments where we're trying to site waves and waves and tides into are a little bit more aggressive than the further offshore ones, because we have a lot of waves that are acting on the infrastructure there. But if the technology keeps pace with that, it would be incredible to see that the oceans were able to supply a huge rate of energy, enough to compete with fossil fuels. As it stands at the moment, it would be incredible.
And that was a fantastic question. If anybody does have any other ones, please do write them in the comments, and I'll be able to ask Claire. In terms of where, we talked about kind of like that kind of future kind of scenario, but obviously the UK is an island, so kind of quite perfect for offshore wind, because it's very windy near us, there's lots of sea.
Yep.
Obviously for countries that don't have much of a coastline, it might be more difficult, or if the geology isn't correct, like right in that area. But where else, because you've kind of travelled around the world with this and with your job, where else is kind of leading in wind energy, and is the UK really one of the global leaders currently in wind energy?
The UK is, if we exclude China. The UK is very much at the forefront. I think we have the most operational wind farms, and we produce the most megawatts from wind globally. I think how we've implemented that in terms of how we've done that has just been incredible, absolutely amazing. But it's really difficult to keep pace with China, because they're also, I think as it stands, they are now the largest contributor to offshore wind, but they also have they have the facilities to design and the resources to actually make these wind turbines as well. So they're completely self-sustained, and they can put them much faster than anyone else. But the great thing about the UK and being at the forefront of offshore wind is that now we've started to inspire America and other different places, and we're starting to see that Americans and other companies from outside the UK, outside of Europe, are starting to try and learn from the UK and what we've done with our offshore wind. And then an amazing place for that to start is America, because yeah, like you said, all we need is a coastline, relatively shallow waters with a wind source, and it's perfect. It's just now, I guess, politics and all of these different things control that, but we're now seeing a huge growth in the US, and hopefully in Canada and a lot of other places we'll start to see that really kick off way more, and it will be really great for the UK to really lead that, and that's what we're doing at the moment, which is an incredible achievement from us. Yep.
And then we've got a couple of questions just before we move on, because we always love to know how kind of geographers in the classroom got to where they are. Some people say that the issues with renewable energy is that they are really like environmentally damaging at the beginning, or that they are there's a lot of kind of hidden carbon use or kind of energy use in that initial construction. What are your views on that? Do you think the kind of clean energy that comes out outweighs it? And do wind turbines actually cause environmental damage on the seabed?
That's such a great question. And yeah, it's a really fantastic one. I think offshore wind and the putting infrastructure into the seabed is something that we're looking at how that actually impacts that environment at the moment. So we have a lot of now studies that will go in and they will look at the benthic colonies, so all of the organisms that might be living in that area. We will go in and investigate what's there, and then during the lifetime of the wind farm, which could be up to maybe 35 years, they'll consistently analyse how the wind farm has actually impacted the environment around it. And in some locations, we can see that the wind farms maybe had a positive spin in that place for the benthic communities. They start to evolve a lot more. And it's similar with offshore rigs, oil rigs that they use in the North Sea. There is now entire colonies that have evolved around these rigs and different things. And now the question is it worth taking these sort of infrastructures out now, or do we leave them in? Because they've had huge environmental developments around them, and now it would be potentially more detrimental to take them out. So I think our offshore wind farms really balance out that, because I don't think, as far as I know, they aren't too detrimental to the environment they're being put into. It's just the resources that we need for offshore wind, such as the amount of steel that we use to actually, put them into the seabed, because most of the time they will go 60 meters below the seabed, and they're sited into monopiles, so just the big circular tubes that are used for offshore wind. They don't go into water depths deeper than 60 meters. So that's already 100 meters of steel before you've even thought about what's above the ocean and what pops out above there. So I think that if we can engineer things much better, and the way technology is moving with offshore wind, I think we will in the future. We'll engineer much better things that are cleaner and also have a better impact on the environment. And hopefully in the long term, they really have an impact on reducing CO2, and that they encourage different colonies to form around them. And what they're trying to do now at the base of a turbine, sometimes you might have waves or things that impact on the turbine. And now there's a lot of things called nature-based solutions, where they're looking for nature style, so looking at putting oyster colonies around the base of wind turbines, or cod that like to live in rocks, perhaps introducing cod colonies that live in that sort of around the turbines and start like having their homes there, and just thinking about nature-based solutions that will work to also promote the environment there as well, and not only think of it as something detrimental. We really do consider the environment as one of the most important things, because the sea is it provides almost everything, so it's fundamental that we don't go in and ruin any environments or do anything like that, and we're always assessing that as well.
Brilliant. And then kind of the final question from me was in terms of how does the electricity generated from the wind turbines, how does that get to us in our homes?
Well, the cables are connected, the wind turbines are connected together all by cables called inter-array cables, and they are connected to an offshore power station. So that is also on the seabed as well. And all the cables have cables connected to them, and they all connect to the substation underneath the sea. And then we also have a huge cable that will feed off of that onto the land, and there will be an onshore substation, and that basically harnesses all the energy from the turbines as well. So we have that, and that can be connected to the grid. So you can have wind power directly onto the grid. And that's one of the wind power is amazing, and we can store that and have the cables connect everything together. It comes on shore and you're locked into the grid. We just can't store the wind power, and I think that's one of the questions that might come up is what do we do when we're not using the wind power, or does it ever go down? And sometimes we're producing too much power from wind that goes onto the grid as well. So yeah, we're constantly trying to have a balancing act of the wind farm producing a perfect amount of energy and us using that on the grid as well by these huge electrification cables. So there has to be a balancing act, but we can't store the energy that isn't used from wind. And I think that's what limits us in competing with fossil fuels, is that if we could store that energy, there wouldn't really be any issues. But we can't store that energy at the moment. And hopefully as technology continues in the future, that's something that we can do. We can start to think about how we might store this power, and then we become a competitor of fossil fuels, because it's a storage that we have problems with in terms of the renewable energies as a whole. It's difficult to store, and you can only really put it straight onto the grid.
Yeah, so you can't store it very well, and that also means that if you have excess, you can't then give it to another area.
Exactly. Yeah, and you can't give it away.
Does the energy that comes into the UK, can that go across the whole grid, or is it still quite localised?
No, I think they do go across the whole grid. I think that can. Yeah, I think it can go across the entire grid. Yeah, but I'm not 100% sure how that works entirely, because I see different things that we're using on the grid all the time, and I'm still like, I don't understand why that isn't mostly wind. But we also have to consider that some days it just isn't windy as well. Some days at sea, even though we sight them there and it is the most windy, some days when it's during the summer and it might be, a little less windy, which means we get less energy as a whole. Which is probably better during the summer, because that's when we're less likely to use it. And then in the winter is when everyone wants to have their heating on and everything on. So that's when the power supply becomes huge. And that's when offshore wind plays its role, I feel, because, we in the UK, we always have really windy winters. And then in the summer, it usually dies down. And that's when we're using less power as well. So that works quite nicely.
Fantastic. If there are any final questions, please just put them in the chat box to the side. And then, Claire, one question we ask all of our guests is how do they get into their careers? And it's really fantastic that we have a geographer in a career beyond. We've been interviewing a lot of academics recently, so they've kind of stayed in education. So this might be really useful for students kind of thinking about. You studied geography at school, but what did you then go on to study, and how did you get to where you are today?
Yep. So yes, I studied geography in high school. I think it was my favourite subject in high school. I loved physical geography, and I really loved volcanoes, earthquakes, anything associated with the earth and huge structures. I just really, really enjoyed them. So I was really passionate about physical geography, and that led me to do earth science at the University of Glasgow, which was understanding the processes that had shaped the landscape of the earth and as it is today. And that was, I did. So that was my bachelor's degree at Glasgow University, which was incredible. And I learned so much about the earth. And that really inspired me into looking at some offshore jobs that would interest me as well. But then I decided that I wanted to stay in academia, and I did a master's in petroleum. And at the time, petroleum was kind of dying down, but also wasn't. And I thought it would have a reboot and I would get back into the petroleum industry, which was where I kind of wanted to be 10 years ago. And so then I did a master's at the University of Manchester in petroleum geoscience for exploration, which is using pretty much the same skill set that I use today in the job that I do. And I loved the master's so much, and I learned so much in that time. It really inspired me then to do a PhD, and I really wanted to learn more about offshore processes, and then I got a PhD, which led me to do looking at underwater rivers. So my PhD basically was on ships doing the same thing, the same geophysical surveys, except just focusing on the seabed and taking huge, amazing high resolution images of the seabed. And then we would look at how these underwater rivers would impact any infrastructure that was on the seabed, and whether it was a wind farm or whether it was communication cables, because actually a lot of our internet communication cables and potentially electrification cables are all at sea. And we don't want these cables to break because they're really expensive. So my PhD was looking at how we link the breakage of cables to different river flows, and we were able to work out that in 1 in 20 and 1 in 50 years we just had these huge surges in river floods, and those usually linked to cable breaks. And I really, really loved my PhD. And then when I finished that, I found the role at Atkins, which was basically using all the skill set that I had learned from my bachelor's and from my master's and from my PhD. And it was the same skill set, but looking at renewables. And it really took me out of the oil industry that I thought I wanted to be in, and really inspired me to stick with the renewable sector. And it's been incredible because I've got to work in so many different places. And during my PhD, I got to travel to Canada and America. I was in Patagonia, in Argentina, onshore, just looking at things there that were analogues for different things that could potentially be offshore. And it was just, yeah, and I got to travel to Canada, and I stayed in Canada for 3 months just assessing different things that might impact the seabed infrastructure there as well. And I did a lot of geophysical surveys. So I got to travel the world just within my PhD and with Atkins, and we get to go to conferences and really keep up with the technology and how things are moving. Yeah. And yeah, so geography was my main goal at the end, and it really inspired me into the role that I'm in today. It was, yeah, my favorite subject in high school when I was 13, and I still really am passionate about that today, and it really fed into the role that I'm in today. And I get to use all the things that I learned from all of my different degrees and apply it to something that I think is really fundamental for the future now as well. And it's been great. Yeah, really amazing.
Fantastic. And it's so nice to hear from students from kind of going from geography, actually the kind of what you can study at university and beyond, and how it's so in depth and quite different from their kind of school experience, but all linked to it. And probably from the Curious Geographer community and Time for Geography community and all those kind of teachers out there, we're probably very happy that you have stayed in the left the petroleum industry and kind of using your kind of your experiences, your knowledge, your understanding, and your passion to kind of work on renewables, particularly in terms of like our future world. So big thank you from all the geography community for going to Renewables.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been amazing. I absolutely love it, and I'm so happy to be here today as well. I feel like it feels like you're really contributing to something, which is really fulfilling, and it feels, yeah, it's a really nice role to have. Yeah, and from high school, I was very uncertain about what I wanted to do. I just knew that I loved geography, and I found geology, and it was just basically physical geography in the form of a degree, and I was like, oh, amazing, absolutely incredible, and I loved every degree that I did as well. They were really, really incredible and taught me so many things. Yeah, really, really amazing. So lucky to be in the position I'm in. I feel yeah, I'm really, really lucky.
Fantastic, and thank you so much for being a guest on this live interview. It's been really fantastic to have you, and thank you for sharing all your in-depth knowledge about kind of exploring the seabed floor and how we can use that for renewable energy. So a big thank you from us, our end.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then just to let everybody know for the end, thanks everybody for joining. If you check out the Time for Geography website, then there's lots of our new kind of videos which are all based on the live interviews from before, and you can look out for a shorter kind of classroom version of this interview in the future as well. But hopefully you're going to hopefully you enjoy them. They are all up, as I said, on the Time for Geography website under the Curious Geographer section. And have a lovely rest of half term for those who are on half term, and for those who have got 2 weeks. I'm very jealous of you. But for me, I will see you back, I think it is on the 1st of November, but we will send out some kind of communications about that. So big goodbye, and have a lovely half term break.